How are we doing today, everyone? And welcome into this episode of Dynasty Fantasy Football Talk for the 2022 season. Today, we're going to be taking a step forward and looking into this offseason as well as the big picture with some running back rankings. So, again, Dynasty 2022 Fantasy Football, let's get started. Before I get too far into today's episode, I want to let those of you know who are just looking for football and NFL content from me. For the rest of this week, I'll be on vacation, so I won't be able to really post on YouTube much, as I won't be able to bring my recording studio with me. But what I will be doing is posting in the SFS Community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. That's one way to get a hold of me. Also, I will be obviously bringing my phone with me, so I'm going to be looking to create some more TikTok videos and content on that platform. So, in terms of YouTube, it'll be a little bit of a quieter week as this is probably the last episode I'll get out. However, again, the SFS Community Discord, I'll probably be tweeting, and then all of my NFL divisional round content, prop bets, betting the spread, all that great stuff, predictions and whatnot will be found on my TikTok. So go check that stuff out. Give me a follow on there and click that subscribe button if you're new around here to the channel. But into our rankings now, my first player on the board is Jonathan Taylor. This is nothing to be unexpected here. I would assume that Jonathan Taylor is basically everyone's RB1 for not only the 2022 redraft season, but the Dynasty platform as well. There are four main things I like to take a look at when assessing a player's Dynasty value. And I think Jonathan Taylor, at the end of the day, is kind of a picture-perfect example of checking all four of the major boxes that I like to peek at. I like to look at a player's age, their skill set, their situation, and their health. And we'll start with age. Jonathan Taylor will be entering into his age 23 season next year. That's prime time for a running back to be in the peak of his NFL shelf life and to have the lack of wear and tear on his body that he needs to perform at an optimal level. Now, there is sometimes important context that goes behind a player's age and dives deeper into the numbers. Some players have a more rigorous college workload than others, Jonathan Taylor being one of those players. However, when you factor in that other sector, their health, Jonathan Taylor has yet to have a significant injury that's caused him to miss a significant amount of time in either the college or NFL level. So JT is someone who's had a very clean slate, a very clean reputation, and hasn't really had too many of those concerns that would indicate to us an added element of risk when investing to him on a Dynasty platform. So age and health, two major check boxes that he fulfills there, and then the skill set. You get everything with Jonathan Taylor that you could possibly want out of a workhorse NFL running back. You've got the ability to catch passes out in space, the explosiveness in the open field to take off in the blink of an eye, and to be an electric running back. He's able to put his shoulder down, be physical on the goal line, punch touchdowns in for 6 points. And then the situation. You give me a top 5 offensive line year in and year out. You've got some really great pieces up front. Ryan Kelly at center. You've got the pair of tackles, Braden Smith, and then inside you've got Quentin Nelson, your pulling guard, that is an absolute dominant player. So you have 3 really solid core offensive linemen. And then you give me a situation where Jonathan Taylor is the focal point of this offense. He is the key player, and everything is really built off of the run game in Indianapolis. So all 4 of the major boxes that I look for in a prime fantasy candidate to be this number 1 running back, Jonathan Taylor fulfills all of those benchmarks. And I think that as we start to move down the list here, players start to only be able to half check a box, if that makes sense. They don't entirely fulfill the criteria to be a perfect player in that situation. And again, there is context that has to go behind some of the stuff like I talked about with JT and the age. It's fantastic that he's only going to be 23, and yes, he does have a higher college workload than some other players on the list in today's episode. However, when you then put into context the health situation and how good and clean of a slate that's been to this point in his career, I think that you really have minimalized risk with JT here. Everything seems to sort of add up to a real picture-perfect situation. He's coming off a great season. By a normal running back standards, this might have been the best year you could hope for a running back. However, with Jonathan Taylor's talent and the ceiling I think he can get to as a player. I think his best days are still ahead of him. I think that this season was probably one of the better years he'll have. However, I do think there is an opportunity within the next 2 to 3 years here that he could top the 2021 season and have an even better statistical output year if that Colts team in that situation with Indianapolis is able to progress, and as a football team they get better, because that's something we'll talk about with team situations here becoming a little bit less desirable with some other players in the list, and that'll impact their rankings here as we get into the rest of today's video. So I really went back and forth between really my numbers 2 through 5 here. I had various arguments for and against all of these players, and I think that this is what made it so clear that Jonathan Taylor is the Dynasty running back 1 for me at this point in time. Now, this is a constantly evolving list. This is something that'll be changing multiple times throughout this offseason. I will update it quite regularly, and obviously I will expand upon these rankings. Today I'm really just going to do a deep dive into my top 10. Najee Harris for me right now is my Dynasty running back number 2, and I'll talk about as we get into 3, 4, and 5 why he ranks ahead of these players, as I can sort of talk through those players as well. But for now, we'll just talk about Najee Harris. This is a player who does not have as good of a situation as a Jonathan Taylor. To start off with, he does have the age, he does have the skill set, and he does have the health checked off in terms of those 4 key components that I talked about at the top of today's episode. He is just 23 years of age. He is a bit of an older player for this stage of his NFL career. However, at Alabama, it wasn't always his time to shine for his entirety of his time with that team. So that's not something that scares me all that much. He has avoided major injury and was a very dependable play in our lineups here in his rookie season. He's a very tough, very durable back. He can play physical football just like a Jonathan Taylor. He is able to get out in space and catch passes as well. However, the one question mark that I do have about Najee Harris is situation. And I don't think the situation for Najee Harris is quite as good as it is for Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis. Yes, Carson Wentz has his flaws. Yes, the Colts were not a playoff team this year. However, quarterback is such an important factor of a offense, and therefore a running back situation, that the mess in Pittsburgh now with Ben Roethlisberger playing his final game as a Steeler, or at least, that's what it almost guaranteed seems like here. You have to wonder who's going to be under center for Pittsburgh in 2022. And I think that there are certainly options and potential scenarios that would make this a lot more of a desirable situation. For example, if the Steelers were able to create the best case situation and trade for an Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson, that would make Najee Harris become even more clear-cut and even more the concise RB2 for Dynasty Fantasy Football moving forward. However, there are some lower-end options that I think are a lot more likely. I think that trading for an Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson are rather optimistic potential situations, and I think that those wouldn't be the most likely outcomes if you were to ask me today. Now, I think that it's not completely impossible that those things are to happen, but if you look at the success Aaron Rodgers had in Green Bay this season, the question marks still looming with Deshaun Watson, the uncertainty about the head coaching situation for the Texans, there's so many elements that are at play here that it is absolutely no guarantee that either of those two players, while Pittsburgh is a very attractive landing space for a veteran quarterback who could be on the move, I think those two being upper echelon names at the quarterback position would be a bit of a reach to say that those players are certainly going to, one of those two options, be the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2022. So I think we have to be a little bit more realistic with our expectations here for who could be under center for Pittsburgh in 2022. I think a Jimmy Garoppolo, depending on how he does this NFL postseason, could be on the move. Now, he did just pick up a big win against the Dallas Cowboys. That was a very impressive game. He did have a really bad interception, which is kind of the knock on Jimmy G. Sometimes his situational football is not perfect, but he is a very good game manager. And if you give him an offense with the weapons that he has at his disposal in Pittsburgh, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris out of the backfield, the receiver core is very good right now. Even with Juju Smith-Schuster having a contract situation this offseason, you still got Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Ray McCloud, James Washington. Actually, I think he might be up in terms of his contract. But the point is that there's a lot of pieces to work with. The offensive line is not perfect. It's a work in progress, but they did get a little bit younger this past draft. They addressed some situations on that line. There is more work that needs to be done there. So I think a Jimmy G would be a lot more of a realistic situation. If that were the case, I would feel better about even my next situation, which I'll kind of glance over here, but that would be a Kenny Pickett or an NFL draft prospect. I think that realistically speaking here, when you bring in a rookie quarterback, you can't expect them to be like a Joe Burrow, like a Justin Herbert immediately, especially when the expectations for this rookie draft class are a lot lower than the expectations placed on the 2021 draft class or even some of the classes prior. So I think that the worst case for Najee's immediate fantasy value would be to draft a rookie quarterback. For example, look at some of the struggles that even Trevor Lawrence had this season in Jacksonville and that a Justin Fields had in Chicago. Almost every rookie quarterback struggled at some point this season. Even Mac Jones, who arguably had the best day one situation for a rookie starting quarterback, he struggled late in the year, and the offensive output of that Pats team really went on a steep decline over the back quarter of the season. So I think that we have to be really cautious with how we evaluate Najee Harris for the 2022 season. I've got him in the lower end range. I think I had him at number 8 in my early 2022 redraft rankings. But I do think long-term the situation with Pittsburgh is one that is good. I do expect this team to try and address that quarterback room. Obviously, having Mike Tomlin as your head coach and a very elite group of talent on the defensive side of the football, as well as having a very viable wide receiver core, there are certainly moves that can be made to keep this team in contention for not only the AFC North and a playoff spot every year, but potentially a Super Bowl depending on what happens. So again, that quarterback situation is going to have a large factor in how I value Najee Harris going forward. Right now, I would say he has a loose grasp on this number 2 spot for me in Dynasty, but if that quarterback situation were to become even better, I think he becomes the clear-cut number 2 running back in Dynasty. And again, that's how I see things right now. Whereas, and I'll just kind of touch on this one more time before we move into number 3 here, those 4 key factors: age, health, situation, and skill set is what I take a look at here and try and analyze in depth and put context behind. For me, Jonathan Taylor checks off all 4 of those boxes. Najee Harris checks off 3, that being age, health, and skill set. The situation, however, is the main factor here that puts Najee down at this number 2 spot and could potentially drop him further depending on how that quarterback position is addressed in the draft this season, because that has a huge influence on the overall production potential of an offense. At number 3 here, I've got Christian McCaffrey. So Christian McCaffrey is certainly a player who is on the back stretch of his prime, I would say. We obviously have our question marks about Christian McCaffrey due to the last 2 years of output and availability. We'll get into those 4 big factors here, obviously, in a second. But CMC will be entering into his age 26 season. So at face value, that seems like a really good age, but obviously the running back position ages and has a shorter shelf life than any other position in football, and especially fantasy football here. And I'll just dive right into it. The major question mark is health. Health is certainly a box that I don't think Christian McCaffrey can check off for us right now. He's only played in 10 games total in the last 2 seasons, and he's missed 20 games in that span of time. So he has missed twice as many games as he's played. And as I talked about him ending or approaching the end of his quote-unquote expected NFL prime, these are things that are very important and very pressing question marks that have to be addressed and have to be wondered about here as we go forward. And also, the situation isn't something that is all that fantastic, to look at here. So you can already see, moving into my number 3 running back player or number 3 running back rank here, there are major question marks about a player's long-term value that are already being asked at number 3. So you can imagine how things start to break down here as we get lower into this list. And as you'll hear me talk about in just a couple of players here, there are players lower down on this list that I might actually rather have on my Dynasty team if I was in the middle of a rebuilding process, or if I was a team not quite ready to compete for my league's championship. However, I think that the skill set of Christian McCaffrey being as elite as it is, the absolute dominance that he possesses and has the potential to provide as an asset when he is on the field, is what puts him higher up on the list here. With his skill set only being age 25 right now, heading into that age 26 season, there's a potential for 3 or even 4 more RB1, that being a top 12 player level production seasons, because of how he can go about getting his fantasy points. He had 3 games this season in half PPR scoring when he was available and actually suiting up to play games for us. 3 games in half PPR scoring where he scored over 20 points without scoring a touchdown. That is ridiculous. That shows you how valuable he is as a receiver and the damage he can do in terms of scrimmage yardage output and receptions that he can bring to the table. So CMC's got a skill set almost unmatched by any of these other players. I would say that if Christian McCaffrey had not had the 2 injury struggle seasons, riddled with shoulders, ankles, hamstrings, if those things were not brought into account here and we had 2 more seasons of full health and great production, maybe he misses 4, 5, 6 games collectively throughout those 2 seasons, maybe CMC is still my number 2 running back on the table here. Obviously a player who is still aging, who is not on his rookie contract. That's a big thing for fantasy running backs, is obviously you typically get the best production out of them while they're on the rookie contracts. However, that skill set, that pass catching capability could potentially provide Christian McCaffrey an elongated ceiling and an elongated situation here for Dynasty. So having that skill set, having that elite level, and that gear that almost no other player can get to in terms of being a PPR asset is what keeps him so high on this list. But again, just like Najee Harris and the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's a major quarterback question mark in the Carolina Panthers offense. We have no idea what that situation looks like going forward. The one thing that I do have optimism for, though, is that we've seen CMC in a situation in Carolina his entire career, and he has been a top-end fantasy running back for multiple seasons with terrible quarterback play. Even when he had Cam Newton before the Panthers released him the first time, Cam was not playing his best football. He didn't have Cam Newton during his MVP season, and he wasn't the lead back during Cam Newton's prime. So he got a Cam Newton at less than his best. He's had Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold, PJ Walker have been kind of the quarterbacks in this rotation of a quarterback carousel that's been a mess, and he's still produced in spite of that. So again, it's that skill set that keeps him up here at this number 3 spot, because as he is aging, he is still a fairly young player, but he is someone who is, again, approaching the end of that expected prime, and he does have those health question marks and then that situational question mark as well, which is something that I think is really big and needs to be considered here moving forward. And that's where we get to Alvin Kamara. So he is slightly older than Christian McCaffrey at this moment in time, so it's not that much of a difference to me. He is 26 years of age. He will be entering into that age 27 season. But Alvin Kamara is someone who, like a Christian McCaffrey, possesses that extra gear that not many other players can get to in terms of his added value as a receiving back. And something I've talked about with Alvin Kamara, even in the short term here, is the elite value he provides and the added bonus to health in terms of keeping himself clean, that being a receiving back brings to the table. And what I mean by that is that Alvin Kamara, if you watch him, when he catches passes out of the backfield, in particular when Drew Brees was the quarterback of this football team, Kamara would catch a pass and scamper out of bounds and get you quality fantasy points without taking very many hits, without being tackled, brought to the turf, and absorbing contact that would be something inducive to him having that running back physical limited shelf life, because you're taking a lot more hits than any other position on the field. However, with Alvin Kamara, what you're getting is a player who is catching a high volume of passes out of the backfield, being very efficient with his touches, and not racking up that level of workload, and therefore staying healthy and pushing the boundaries for how long a running back could potentially sustain elite level production. This season was a little bit different, though, with Jameis Winston finally kind of figuring out how to use Alvin Kamara properly, how to be that Sean Payton offensive quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Just as things were starting to click, just as things were starting to progress forward in the right direction, and I was starting to feel really good about Alvin Kamara again. Obviously, Jameis Winston was no Drew Brees, but he was starting to figure things out and do things in a manner that I thought was positive and starting to increase Alvin Kamara's fantasy value on a week-to-week basis. He tears his ACL against Tampa Bay, And now the Saints quarterback carousel begins. And you've got Trevor Siemian, you've got Ian Book, you've got Taysom Hill, all starting at different times. None of them, having a very extended or consistent playing time, because obviously Taysom Hill played, then he got COVID. He ended up having an injury. Ian Book starts one game against the Dolphins. That was an utter disaster. And then Trevor Siemian had some starts in between while Taysom was injured and dealing with stuff and whatnot. And that's when we saw Alvin Kamara start to have to play more like a real NFL running back. And the more inside handoffs he was taking, the more large bodies were falling on top of him, the more wear and tear he was experiencing. We ended up having that knee issue that held him out for a large extended period of time, in terms of missing more than just a couple games and having to deal with that knee injury for basically the back half of the season, and dealing with that for an extended period of time. That played a real factor in his long-term fantasy value this season. He wasn't able to be used in his most optimal fashion, again, taking more wear and tear, sustaining more injuries over that span of time. And that's when you're starting to see that Alvin Kamara is not so immune to the same issues that other fantasy running backs are susceptible to when he's used like a prototypical NFL running back. So I think that Kamara, someone going forward, is someone who still has the potential to have elite fantasy running back seasons in him. But again, that situation is what it comes down to. Who's the quarterback going to be for the Saints long term? If it is Jameis Winston, I'm fine with that. I think he can succeed at doing so. And I think if he's able to be used in this receiving volume fashion that we've seen him be so successful with under Drew Brees, maybe Kamara has 3 or even 4 top 12 running back seasons left in him. Now, maybe those aren't all top 5 seasons, but maybe he's got 1 or 2 of those left at this age 26 marker, and he can play to age 30 at a very, very high level. And obviously we saw his efficiency and his touch load start to become at a more optimal and efficient level when Mark Ingram returned to the Saints offense. There's a lot of things to unpack here, and that's what really makes Alvin Kamara's situation so interesting for Dynasty Fantasy Football moving forward, is that I think he has the potential and ability to remain as a top-level fantasy producer for a couple more seasons. It's just going to be how this Saints off-season progresses here and how this situation evolves heading into 2022, because I think that that'll set up for this team, obviously at the quarterback position long-term, but also Alvin Kamara in the short term needs someone that's going to be able to keep his health in check, because I think that if next year we're looking at a Taysom Hill leading this offense and Alvin Kamara is asked to be that true running back where he's taking 20-plus handoffs a game, that's not what you want to see. And in that case, I would probably move Alvin Kamara down the list here and move off of him if I were a fantasy owner of him, because I don't want to see him taking a high volume of hits inside the heart of the defense and really being used in a physical manner, which is I don't think is the best situation for Kamara in a fantasy sense. So Alvin Kamara, we will learn a lot more about the Saints offense. Obviously the skill set is there. The age, obviously, just like Christian McCaffrey, we're starting to push those boundaries a little bit more. But that situation is the major question mark here. Health has been something that has been pretty dang good for the most part throughout his NFL career. He has had some ankle issues. He's dealt with some hamstring stuff throughout his career, but he's never really missed significant time until that knee issue. And I wouldn't say that that was the most significant of injuries, but obviously having aggravation in your knee is not what you want to see out of an NFL running back. And I think that that was a result of the increased rushing attempts he saw this year. So depending on how the Saints address quarterback this offseason, that'll have a big impact on how I view Alvin Kamara next year. But at the moment, I'm going to be optimistic and assume that the right measures are taken to assess Alvin Kamara properly and the Saints team to get that quarterback position stabilized for moving forward. Now Javonte Williams here. So this is where I talked about with Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, obviously. I have Javonte at number 5 here, but if I'm looking for the long-term big picture, if I'm not trying to compete in the next season or two, I would rather have Javonte Williams on my team. I think that Javonte Williams is by far the better long-term option here at the running back position. I think that this is a situation where, to a lesser extent, you have all 4 boxes checked, but you have at least more confidence in the upside of him being able to fulfill all of those things you're asking of him. The age is fantastic. You're getting a rookie running back here, or a player heading into his second NFL season at just 21 years of age, obviously entering into age 22. You've got a player who has a light workload. He wasn't a 3-year starter at North Carolina. It was actually Michael Carter's backfield, and then an injury to Michael Carter opened up the situation and an opportunity for Javonte Williams to see more touches, in which he thrived and obviously drove up his draft stock, resulting in him being drafted at the top of the second round in the 2021 NFL Draft. And now you've got a player with a 3-down skill set, led the NFL in forced broken tackles in his rookie year, a very physical player, and a very smooth pass catcher that could potentially have 4 to 5 years of top 12 running back potential here, because in his rookie season, he didn't really take that much wear and tear. Yes, he plays physical football. He is someone who I expect to wear down eventually because of the physical nature of his game. However, you're at the very beginning of that process. He had a 50-50 split, dang near even, between himself and Melvin Gordon in 2021. There wasn't a true workhorse in this running back system here in this Denver Broncos offense. And Javonte and Melvin Gordon show that they were both able to thrive with Teddy Bridgewater at the helm of this offense. And that quarterback position is another group here where we could see this team take a step forward. What we talked about with the Pittsburgh Steelers potentially bringing in a Jimmy Garoppolo. He's another option I think that could fulfill that quarterback void in the Denver Broncos offense, and for a team that could potentially bring in an offensive head coach this year, I think that opens up the upside and potential for a Javonte Williams and this whole offense even further here as we move into 2022. So the health box is checked off here by Javonte Williams. Stayed very healthy this year. He did have a couple bumps and bruises for a while. He did have some knee aggravation, but it never really forced him to miss time or to have too much question marks surrounding his health in terms of availability this season. The age, again, is fantastic. I think the situation is developing here, progressing and improving with Melvin Gordon's expected exit here from this Denver Broncos offense. We are anticipating that Javonte Williams will be the 3-down workhorse back for this team. Again, the second we get the news that it is his 3-down role to be had going forward, I think he might even jump in Alvin Kamara here. I think that he could potentially become more valuable than a Christian McCaffrey. And like I said, I would maybe even rather have a Javonte Williams over a Christian McCaffrey over an Alvin Kamara. But I'm not so sure that his talent lines up with theirs as a pass catcher. Like I said, he's very smooth receiving the football out of the backfield, but he's not explosive at an elite level. He is fairly explosive, but I wouldn't put him in the same conversation as a Jonathan Taylor. I wouldn't say that he's as skilled of a pass catcher as a Christian McCaffrey or as an Alvin Kamara, but again, where he does factor in is he's the youngest player that we've talked about yet. He is younger than Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, who's in the same draft class, a few years younger than a Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara. So there's a lot of upside to be had here. There's a lot of long-term shelf life and utility that you can have in your fantasy lineups. And if you're looking for a long-term fix at the running back position, I would look no further than a Javonte Williams, because right now his stock isn't sky high, and it is quite high because of the upside that a lot of fantasy managers recognize that he has, and it is sky high because of or not sky high rather, but it is fairly high because of the value placed upon his young age. However, he hasn't reached his fantasy production output peak yet. He hasn't actually produced elite numbers, top 5 running back numbers week over week in the fantasy scoring column. He has had flashes of dominance, for example, that first Kansas City game this past season when Melvin Gordon was out of the lineup the second time around. It was more so Melvin Gordon's show, but you do have upside, you do have opportunity here, so that's again something fantastic to look at, and I would absolutely love to have Javonte Williams on my team. At number 6 here, I've got DeAndre Swift, another player whose situation, one of those boxes I've been talking about all video long here, it is progressing. I do see this Lions offensive situation as something that is ascending and becoming more and more favorable, as opposed to potentially a Najee Harris, where your Pittsburgh offensive situation is very much in question and could decline depending on who that new quarterback is brought in. With the Lions here, I see a very good offensive line. They got really banged up and really injured this year. You're going to be getting those guys back healthy next year. And for a large part of this season, Detroit didn't have their starting center. They had some issues with their tackles missing some time, even some guards in and out of the lineup. It's a really good 5-man offensive line when everyone is healthy and out there on the field. And when you talk about DeAndre Swift, something I love here is that this is a player who isn't solely that prototypical running back. DeAndre Swift brought a lot of his value to the table as a receiver this season and as a pass catcher out of the backfield, and that's something you love. Again, talking about an Alvin Kamara, a Christian McCaffrey, these are players who can catch passes and get out of bounds. They can catch balls out in space, avoid big hits from those interior defensive linemen, and get tackled by safeties or cornerbacks in the open field. And even then, the significance of being tackled by a 350-pound man landing on top of you and being snagged by an ankle or being tripped up by your shoelaces by a defensive back in the open field are two very different things. So these pass-catching running backs that can get out in space, be electric, and can make people miss are so valuable. And again, when you talk about Detroit adding talent with multiple top draft picks this year, having players come back healthy, year 2 with Dan Campbell in this offensive system, there is a lot of upside, a lot of potential, and a lot of reason to be excited about the value that DeAndre Swift can provide here. At age 23, he is entering into year 3 as an NFL player. That is prime time, getting the best opportunity and getting the best situation for. Now, obviously, you would rather have DeAndre Swift as a rookie. He was a fantastic player. Year 2 is very good for him. But you're getting a player at the front half of his NFL shelf life is, I guess, what I'm trying to explain here. You're not getting someone who might already have his best years behind him. I think that this year 3 in Detroit's offense will be the best structure of talent, the best organization of, obviously, head coach down for this offense, and really just putting him in the best situation to succeed. So I see a lot of value here with DeAndre Swift. Again, 23 years of age is very early in a running back shelf life, and he should have the opportunity to have one of his best fantasy seasons here in year 3 and in year 4, and we'll see what happens, obviously, moving forward with the contract situation, him being a second-round draft pick. They won't have the fifth-round option, or excuse me, the fifth-year option to pick up if they want to keep DeAndre Swift around after that. They'll have to extend him with a new contract. But at the end of the day, I think the DeAndre Swift situation is fantastic here. And again, progressing and evolving in a positive direction. The age, the skill set, it's all there. The one question mark would be health. He has missed 7 games in his first 2 seasons. However, we've got other players lower on the list that have been thought of as elite tier A players. And obviously, Dalvin Cook is someone we haven't talked about yet. Him being one of those guys that has been basically, it's a safe estimate to pencil in missing 3 to 4 games a year for Dalvin Cook because of hamstrings or ankles or a knee issue, whatever the case might be. Dalvin Cook is one of the players that has been an elite level producer while missing a handful of games every season, and we seem to be fine with that because the production is so good when he's on the field that you just got to make sure you have the handcuffs. So obviously Jamal Williams would be that player for the Detroit Lions offense. Just something to take into consideration, and obviously be aware of when drafting Swift. Austin Ekeler is actually someone that makes it above a Dalvin Cook for me, and this is, again, boiling down to that situation. With age between Dalvin Cook and Austin Ekeler, you're almost even. So I'll kind of talk about 2 players at once here. Ekeler and Cook are pretty much at the same stage of their NFL careers in terms of their raw age value. Health-wise, Dalvin Cook did have the significance of that ACL injury. Austin Ekeler had a pretty bad hamstring issue last year, but he was able to return from that. So both of them have had their nicks. They both missed some time. They both played games and missed time here and there. But for Austin Ekeler, what it comes down to for me is the skill set and the situation. Justin Herbert being the quarterback of this Chargers offense, to me, provides a lot more upside, a lot more potential to move the ball, sustain longer possessions, and have more scoring opportunities. That is important. I think that you're going to get more chances with an Austin Ekeler, with Justin Herbert, than you will with Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins, because while that offense is still very, I don't know if I want to go as far as say that they're prolific, but while they are very productive, they aren't able to function as an elite of an upside as this Chargers team is, again, because of that quarterback situation. With Austin Ekeler again as well, you're getting a player who didn't really start until his second contract with the Chargers, and I think has less wear and tear cumulatively than a Dalvin Cook, who has really been the workhorse running back since day one in this Vikings offense. So you're getting, again, a player who, in Austin Ekeler, was an undrafted free agent and came in and was really the second fiddle to Melvin Gordon, who was having some of his best NFL seasons at the beginning of his career, and he didn't really get a chance to put on display what he brings to the table until Gordon decided to hold out early in the 2019 season. Austin Ekeler put on an absolute show, but then once Gordon returned and ended his contract holdout, Ekeler was kind of pushed back to the bench, and then Gordon saw his way out and headed over to Denver, where in 2020 Austin Ekeler was able to receive his first opportunity to start an entire season for this Chargers offense. And again, that is when he had that hamstring issue. I think some people will have concerns about Austin Ekeler's size, and I think a lot of people still kind of undervalue him because of his undrafted free agent status, but this is a very talented player. I actually kind of joked about this in my last episode talking about 2022 redraft rankings for the running back position. He's the strongest pound-for-pound player in the National Football League, so although he is smaller, he is very sturdy. He's able to push his weight out there, and obviously he puts his shoulder down. If you watch Austin Ekeler out there, he is not afraid to run head-on into a linebacker, and he'll drive his legs and gain some yardage. So although he's a bit shorter than other guys, he does look like the smallest guy in the field when he's out there. The receiving ability, do not be fooled. He is not just a scat back. He can certainly get down in there. The Chargers use him on the goal line. That's how he scored 20 total touchdowns this season. He's fantastic. As good of a dynamic player as you could ask for. And again, while him and Dalvin Cook are at the same stages in their NFL career in terms of an age perspective, I think that Ekeler not starting right away in his NFL career has lightened up his workload a little bit. The fact that he is used as one of those pass-catching backs, he can get out of the bounds every once in a while. He does typically seek out contact, but he is someone who is able to get out and avoid hits every once in a while. I like that about his game. I think that having Justin Herbert in your situation and being able to sustain drives and having a higher offensive ceiling is something that's important here, and that's obviously a long-term play as well, because a quarterback is usually going to stick with this team unless he has some significant rift with the organization. So we basically just talked about Dalvin Cook here, my number 8 player, but again, what it boils down to is Kirk Cousins versus Justin Herbert. The fact that Dalvin Cook has had a significant issue, that being the ACL injury, and that we do kind of expect him to miss 3 or 4 games a year. This year was a little bit closer to 4, whereas last season he missed, I believe, just 2 games in 2020. Fantastic player, though. The offense is built around Dalvin Cook. He checks off the skill set. The situation is, I would say, a B to a B+. Obviously, he doesn't have that elite quarterback. Maybe Minnesota brings in an offensive head coach. I think that would help the situation out significantly. But again, you are getting a team that is a run-first offense built around the play-action pass. He's able to be very efficient. He's still one of the best running backs in the game, if you ask me, even heading into his late age 26 and then eventually turning age 27 season. If you go back to even that Pittsburgh game after he dislocated his shoulder this year, how explosive he looked. He was clearly playing at a different gear than everyone else on the football field. Dalvin Cook is certainly still an elite running back, but I would say at the later stages of his prime, maybe he's got 2 more top 10 fantasy seasons in him. And then after that, he'd probably be a productive fantasy running back too until Minnesota decides to draft his replacement. But certainly someone who, with the expectation that he's going to miss games, I would make it a priority to handcuff an Alex Madison. But even being down here at number 8, I think the gap between a Dalvin Cook and maybe a Christian McCaffrey isn't quite as big as it seems, just because of the numbers here and that difference. Kind of running out the back end of this list now, Joe Mixon at my number 9 spot. This is another player who is in a pretty dang good situation, with Joe Burrow being his long-term quarterback solution there for the Cincinnati Bengals. The one question mark we do have about Joe Mixon's situation, though, is the offensive line. There are some pretty big boys up front there in Cincinnati. They have some massive guards. In particular, Quentin Spain this season has just been a mauler of a pulling guard, but obviously not too agile if you've ever watched him play. It's fun to watch this Bengals team, though. The offense is so dynamic, having 2 outside boundary players and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase that can stretch the field and force the defense to play with a cushion, and then you can come in here and pound the ball with Joe Mixon. Now, the thing with Joe Mixon is that his NFL volume and workload has been very, very high, and that has caused him to have some injuries and miss some time. And that's something that you can't say isn't expected, because he is seeing multiple, and by multiple I mean a handful of 30-plus touch games in each of his last 2 seasons. So you're talking about a player who's got a large amount of wear and tear season in and season out. He is clearly a workhorse player. And when you talk about having that situation with a Joe Burrow, having an elite quarterback that can keep that ball rolling, and that's something I've talked about multiple times throughout today's video, is how important the quarterback play is to a team's ability to sustain drives and to keep the ball moving. I do think in this situation, though, when you look at Joe Mixon, he is heading into, again, that later stage of his age 26 and then eventually into his age 27 season in the middle of next year. You're talking about a player who is potentially going to start wearing down here very quickly. He has the pass-catching ability of a dynamic player you look for, but that's not exactly what they always rely on him to do. I would say that Joe Mixon is a very physical running back. He's a player who does put his shoulder down a lot. He plays a large amount of his snaps in the heart of the defense, taking those bigger shots, as I mentioned, putting his shoulder down and squaring up against the linebacker one-on-one. He's one of those players who is a top 12 running back right now, who is a top-level player, but you have to be expecting the fact that he could potentially miss a significant amount of time. We've seen him miss time throughout his young NFL career already, and I guess while he's not the most young player on the list, and again, the gap isn't huge between these middling players on the list today, but it is something I do think about. At the end of the day, I think that he could have peaked here in 2021. He finished as the RB3, had 16 total touchdowns in 2021. That's a marker I don't necessarily think he will improve upon next year. I think 16 touchdowns is a lot, and I think that for a player who sees the volume he does, health is going to be really important into his long-term fantasy outlook here. So that's a lot of the main points I think about with the Joe Mixon. And then finally here, Derrick Henry, obviously the most dominant power running back we've seen, the most explosive in open space, and what we've seen him do since the 2018 season has been absolutely ridiculous. But what I'll say about Derrick Henry here being my number 10 dynasty running back is that I think that this is an elite short-term play, but the long-term outlook isn't the best for Derrick Henry. I think he's got 1 to 2 top 5 RB seasons left in him if he can stay healthy for an extended period of time. With that being said, this year was the first time we talk about that health category, one of my big 4 there. This is the first time we saw him miss significant time with an injury, and that being an injury sustained, I believe it was week 9, and causing him to miss the rest of the regular season. Now, we're going to get a look at Derrick Henry, see how he has recovered off of that foot issue here this Saturday afternoon with the Cincinnati Bengals traveling to play the Tennessee Titans, the number 1 seed in the AFC. They got the first round bye, did not have to play last week. Derrick Henry's been activated off the IR. It sounds like we're going to get a shot to see him in action and playing against that Cincinnati Bengals number 5 ranked rushing defense during the 2021 NFL regular season. So I'm excited to see Derrick Henry back out there again. Maybe there'll be a little bit of rust. We'll have to put context behind however that situation unfolds for Henry. However, again, I'm only expecting 1 to 2 more elite NFL years. He will be 29 during next season, so that is something that I think is important. That is typically right around the breaking point threshold for an RB shelf life. However, Derrick Henry's the type of player that we haven't necessarily seen before. He is so physical that he is almost the punisher, not the one being punished by these hits. He's, that signature stiff arm, just mashing defenders into the dirt, leaving them behind in the dust. I think that if anyone has a shot to exceed the expectations for running back shelf life while playing such a physical brand of football, it is probably Derrick Henry. I've actually got here in my notes, I think he's got 1 to 2 top 5 fantasy seasons, but I wouldn't be surprised if in his early 30s he's able to pump out 1 more, so a 3rd season of being an RB1, just a lower end RB1 at that. You talk about someone like Adrian Peterson, who had such a long shelf life of being a fantasy relevant running back. He wasn't always able to sustain top 12 numbers, but even in his time with Detroit, at the time the Washington Redskins, obviously now the Washington football team, but he was still a productive player, putting up worthy fantasy points of being someone on a fantasy roster. He just wasn't elite anymore, even in his mid-30s. So there's the chance and potential here that Derrick Henry could sustain life as an NFL player or even a team starting running back for a long time moving forward. It's just, what quality of running back are we going to get? What upside will Derrick Henry have at that point in his career? This is someone who obviously has a ridiculously large amount of volume on a season-over-season basis since his rookie season up until this year when he had that injury. He had improved in every major statistical category every single season with no regression. So it's almost unprecedented territory for the upward trend that we've seen in Derrick Henry's career to this point, and it's something absolutely ridiculous. So again, Derrick Henry is someone I see as the most short-term option of anyone on this list. I think if you're going for a title this season, Derrick Henry's a fantastic option to have. The division is great. The situation, the offense is totally centered and predicated around power running and Derrick Henry himself. And the major question mark would be that foot. So obviously not a perfect player here, not someone that is going to be a 5 to 6 year play like a Javonte Williams could be, maybe even a Jonathan Taylor, who I would say is more of a 4 to 5 year play, potentially a Najee Harris at the top of the list. But today, next season, 2022-2023, could be in the top 5 running back conversation. So these were my top 10 Dynasty running backs as of middle January 2022. Again, this list is going to be constantly changing, constantly evolving. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and added voice into the conversation. So put any comments, questions, concerns you have down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you guys in reply throughout this week, even though, as I said, I'll be on vacation. You can reach out to me again in the community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. Also, I'll be posting on TikTok all throughout this week, so go check me out on that platform. My handle or whatever is Sizzle Fantasy Sports. So go check us out on there. Again, Dynasty Fantasy Football. Check out that community Discord server. There is actually a private section in there just for Dynasty. So if you've got any questions for me regarding Dynasty, you can drop it in the comment section here or whatever, or you can go check out that group and get involved in the conversation with the others we've got in there. I think we've got close to 150 members. So go check all that stuff out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.